Today I'll be showing you how to knit this square for a blanket. While I do that, I'll try to answer the question of whether or not marksmanship training in schools is the same as teaching gun safety. The pattern I'll be using is the diagonal stitch pattern for the Harmony Blanket Knit Along project. I'll leave links to both things in the description below. Today I'll be knitting with this purple yarn. The first thing I'm going to do is cast on 26 stitches. I'd like to know what you all think. Is marksmanship training in schools equivalent to teaching kids gun safety? Click on the iCard section in the corner and let me know. I work as an intern for the National Network Opposing the Militarization of Youth, which has released a guide to show activists what steps they can take to campaign against school marksmanship programs. This was, in part, a response to the Florida Parkland shootings and the subsequent student-led activist actions, like the marches and walkouts. The shooter, Nicola Cruz, was a member of JROTC and received an award at a marksmanship tournament. The objections to these shooting ranges are numerous. Not only do they teach children skills used for shooting accurately, organizations like the National Coalition to Protect Student Privacy have investigated the connection between these ranges, which are set up in communal areas such as the cafeteria or the gym, and lead residue left in the area. Besides these concerns, NOMI and other anti-militarization activists object to how these programs further the militarization of schools and children, as they are directly linked to programs such as JROTC. I've already explained a bit about JROTC and militarization in other videos, but to summarize, kids, instructors, and other teachers stress that JROTC is not a military program, nor does it explicitly position itself as a recruiting tool. Anti-militarization activists disagree. At the very least, the program, quote, enhances the military's ability to have a positive presence in our high schools and local communities, end quote. The Army JROTC budget for 2017 says, quote, the program fosters good citizenship, patriotism, and leadership skills for this valuable potential pool of military applicants, end quote. It primes potential military applicants for military service, and it makes the military have a positive standing in communities, both things which are activities that relate pretty directly to militarization. A lot of people defend the marksmanship program, saying it's a way to teach kids gun safety, and it is like learning about safe sex or home ed classes. So I thought it'd be good exercise for me to try to answer the question, should marksmanship training be taught at US high schools? Now, I'm not American, or really, I am from the Americas, just not from the United States of America. And I'm very new at understanding the extent of militarization and violence in US culture. That is, after all, the main reason why I decided to do both these videos and to start doing the interviews for NOMI, the links of which will be in the description. Both of these projects are to help me learn more about the anti-war effort in the US. Of course, this video, as all of my work, is done for a network that has a very clear stance on the issue. For NOMI, marksmanship training in schools is not only unnecessary, but actively harmful for both the young adults that choose to participate in the program, and also for those that don't, both concretely in the case of the lead poisoning and symbolically and ideologically as acts that normalize violence and the militarization of US society. Additionally, I have a starting personal stance. I don't believe that kids should be taught how to shoot. I don't agree with the war effort the US is currently engaged in. I'm not against the soldiers, nor against the people of the US, but I am against the violence that is currently perpetrated on foreign soil, and against how this violence is talked about, or actually not talked about, in the media and the US school system. It makes me upset to consider that the US is currently engaged in violent military efforts in several countries, and how this fact has become so normal as to become invisible and inevitable to many. But anyways, I can talk about all of this at a later time. Right now, I just want to discuss marksmanship training programs. Despite my initial personal stance, what I say is also intended as a question for people who support the marksmanship training programs to answer. huge fan of reading comments, so I went to several public internet forums and tried to see people's opinion on both gun safety and marksmanship. What I found is people who support and defend marksmanship programs in schools have four main arguments. 1. They teach gun safety. 2. It doesn't make shooters. 3. It's an Olympic sport. And 4. Kids should be able to defend themselves. Despite my initial biases, I'm going to try to give a nuanced take on all of these arguments. And I know what you might be saying, right? Nuance? On YouTube? Yeah. Like, I don't know how that'll actually work, but I can try, right? The first argument is whether or not marksmanship training programs are necessary because they teach gun safety. A lot of people use this as a reason to defend marksmanship programs, but is gun handling equivalent to gun safety? According to one comment I read, quote, "The first part of teaching marksmanship is teaching the shooter what is unsafe to do with their firearm," end quote. Which is fair. After all, you don't want to do something unsafe before you actually, shoot the gun. Considering the prevalence of guns in the United States and how it seems for many to be vitally linked to daily life and culture, I would agree that gun safety seems like a smart thing to teach in schools. As a person outside of the US, it speaks loads to me about how embedded guns are in US society, that this is what people equate with owning and using guns. I mean, look at these people equating the marksmanship training program and learning gun safety with learning how to drive, sex ed, home ec, or woodshop classes. Then there are other people who agree that it is a part of US life, but see gun safety to be equivalent to teaching kids about drugs or alcohol. I don't intend to ignore reality. There are a lot of guns in the US. According to this Guardian article from last November, 265 million guns are owned by civilians in the US. The same article estimates that there are 7.7 million gun super owners, many of which have more than 40 guns. I agree that kids growing up in a country that has so many guns should know what to do to prevent hurting themselves or someone else on the chance that they happen upon or even own one. Because, according to this Washington Post article, while the federal minimum age of owning a handgun is 18, there is no minimum age for owning long guns. Some states set the minimum age to 14, like Montana, or 21, like Illinois, but in 30 states, it is legal for a kid to own a shotgun or a rifle. But really, the question is, do gun safety programs have to involve teaching kids how to shoot guns? There are a few gun safety programs, one of which is perhaps paradoxically sponsored by the NRA. One of the reports I read while researching this video likens Eagle Eddie, the mascot of the NRA gun safety program, to Joe Camel, and criticizes how the program was, in a way, making guns seem like something cool. Interestingly, in that same report, the Violence Policy Center ultimately says that gun safety programs like Eagle Eddie are ineffective in preventing unintentional death and injury from firearms, and cites a brochure from the American Association of Pediatrics that states, quote, "Because even the most well-behaved children are curious by nature and will eagerly explore their environment, the safest thing is not to keep a gun at home," end quote. One of the comments I read said that the program is not present in enough high schools to be a problem. According to the Civilian Marksmanship Association, it's found in around 2,000 high schools and doesn't teach the whole high school population, which makes me think, does it really work as a gun safety initiative if it's only present on a small number of high schools? And I get how that argument can be a double-edged sword. If it's only present in a small number of high schools, and even then isn't directed at the entire school population, why should we bother with trying to disband it? I think the harm that a single person can do shouldn't be underestimated. One of the few high schools where the program was present at was in Stoneman Douglas High School. This is of course notable because last February 14th, a former member of the varsity marksmanship squad became one of the school shooters that claimed the largest number of lives in a high school rampage. Although there are many articles commemorating the students from the JROTC club who undoubtedly were heroes that day, the fact that Nicola Cruz was also part of this club is not remarked upon nearly as much. What does it say about equating marksmanship training to gun safety when he was not only involved in the program but actually won prizes in competitions? Is it really that difficult to imagine that perhaps the skills taught in this program, among which are learning how to shoot skillfully at targets, aided him? And I know some might be saying, but I was part of the program and have never hurt anyone with a gun. Which brings us to our next point. This is a similar argument others use when someone criticizes violent media. Whether it be video games or Hollywood movies, I saw written a couple of times, I learned how to shoot, but I'm not pro-gun, etc. In the case of video games, it is a very messy argument and involves laying a lot of groundwork that, honestly, I'm not going to get into this video. And maybe in the future I will, if I'm brave enough. I mean, just look at this Wikipedia page for the debate on the effects of media violence on real-life violence. It's massive. Instead, there's something much more concrete in this case. Perhaps it doesn't incite killers, but if someone has the intent to use a gun to kill a lot of people, it certainly gives them some very specialized skills to do so. This could just be me. But in a way, the marksmanship program in schools seem like a symbol of the contradiction within this part of US society. Let's look at the zero tolerance policy. It involves the fact that no weapons are allowed within school grounds. And yet, within the same policy, guns that are a part of teaching programs such as the marksmanship program are allowed. Militarization has a concrete component, such as an ever-increasing budget for the Pentagon, the presence of military recruiters in high schools, or the actual fact of increasing military conflicts. However, it also has an immaterial component that seems insubstantial because it exists within a symbolic realm. It's this symbolic aspect that perhaps people could find the most contentious, and the one many activists tend to lean on. Militarization is not just increasing military power, but making this increase justified and normal. Doing that is not only spending money, making weapons, or training soldiers, but also the ways in which these are made to seem either good or at least necessary for a society. The marksmanship program began by being a part of military training and was originally thought of as a helpful skill to teach boys and train themselves for an eventual war following World War I. Currently, it's both sponsored by the civilian marksmanship program, which I mentioned before, and JROTC. JROTC is, of course, a military program. So, can guns be divorced from militarism? The third point I saw a lot being presented as argument were people saying how it was a sport, even practiced at an Olympic level. I saw this a lot. It was actually kind of eerie reading how similar all of these comments were. Even statements found inside news articles had incredibly similar wording. It reminded me of reading what kids, instructors, and parents have to say about the JROTC program. They use almost the same words found in the same JROTC propaganda that is displayed around the classrooms and the program. It's a lot harder for me to debate this point because the stance you take on this ultimately comes down to whether or not you see guns, even the supposedly safe air rifles, as symbolic for other problems found in society. By that I mean whether you're willing and able to remove guns from the context of their use or not. And the difficult part with this argument is that the same could be said about martial arts, archery, or the javelin throw. They are all Olympic sports and they could all conceivably used to harm people. However, for me, the difference lies in this. How many mass murderers in recent times have been facilitated by knowing karate, how to use a bow and arrow, or throw a javelin? The last one is silly to even imagine. This article says that school violence is not a recent thing, but what is recent is how, after the Columbine massacre in 1999, school violence was redefined to mean gun violence, and how it has increased every year until now, 2018. So far, there have already been at least 23 acts of gun violence in schools, one of which has been the most violent to date. So by saying that, does this mean that I am against the shooting events at the Olympics? Honestly, I don't know. My main problem is not exactly with gun ranges or marksmanship as a skill, but the contradiction that exists between a very serious school shooting problem and schools that have shooting classes. If you don't see this as a contradiction, there's just not much I can say to convince you. Then, there's the additional problem of how these classes are linked to the overall problem of militarization and gun violence. But as I said before, those are more abstract. I'd like to eventually talk about this in another video, but I think it's more helpful if we don't dilute the issue in this one. Now let's talk about the last point that I saw. This argument is not as common as the other ones that I stated, but for me it falls in the same place as arming teachers does. The good guys with guns argument that just seems to conjure up in my mind a scenario in which teachers and students are using guns to defend themselves against school shooters. There's not much I can say against this argument because I think it's no longer about what stance a person has regarding the marksmanship program, but instead about gun control at large. And there are plenty of much better informed people to talk about that than me. There are other important parts that I wanted to get to in this video, namely doing a similar analysis of comments made by people who don't support the marksmanship program, and also the very important lead poisoning concerns that are being raised. However, the script for this has already dragged on for way too long, so I just cut it short for now. What do you guys think? Should marksmanship programs be in schools? Please comment below with your thoughts. Also, definitely like, comment and subscribe if you want to see upcoming videos dealing with other issues regarding militarization. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Bye!